The corporate media has promoted one virus story after another in recent years, with most being focused on alleged threats to human health. However, amongst these narratives are a few stories about animal diseases said to be viral in nature. While these do not pose direct threats to us, the proposed responses can be absolutely devastating. The most notorious of these actions has been mass killings, which has included millions of animals on poultry and cattle farms. According to the experts, we have another potential epidemic in the form of foot and mouth disease. The plotline even appeared in episode 3 of the recently released television series Dutton Ranch. While animals getting sick is real, in this video we'll dive into why many elements of this narrative are as fictional as Hollywood's latest TV drama.
Foot and mouth disease is probably the most contagious viral disease in livestock. And it is a devastating disease that affects all cloven-hoofed animals. So sheep, goats, elk, bison, cattle, all of those animals are susceptible to this virus.
According to the US Department of Agriculture, foot and mouth disease, or FMD, is a severe, fast-spreading viral disease that primarily affects cloven-hoofed animals, including cows, pigs, sheep, goats, and deer. The main signs are said to be fever, blisters around the mouth and hooves, excess saliva, and in bad cases, heart disease and death. However, the USDA also state that FMD can easily be confused with other diseases, and the only way to diagnose the FMD virus is through laboratory testing. In other words, pretty much like every other alleged viral disease that the public is threatened with.
Different animals show different symptoms, and so one of our concerns is that particularly in sheep and goats, they're almost asymptomatic.
We will get to testing and diagnosis soon, but first we head over to Wikipedia to read that foot and mouth disease, or hoof and mouth disease, is an infectious and sometimes fatal viral disease that primarily affects even-toed ungulates, including domestic and wild bovids. 2 citations are listed, and they are The Pathogenesis of Foot and Mouth Disease, Parts 1 and 2. Both were published in 2011 in a journal called Transboundary and Emerging Diseases. On a humorous note, publications with trans in the title are often suspect. For example, transgender tapestry, transformation, and transvestia. In the case of the foot and mouth articles, Transboundary and Emerging Diseases brings together the latest research on infectious diseases considered to hold the greatest economic threat to animals and humans worldwide. Perhaps this is equally suspect, as transboundary means beyond a boundary, which implies, well, everywhere. If we search the definition in an online dictionary, one of the first examples comes back as transboundary animal movements facilitate the spread of pathogens across large distances. So we are deep in germ theory dogma here. The first alleged virus to be discovered was tobacco mosaic virus in the 1890s. If you are unaware of the problems with the virologist's claims and that period of history, then please watch my video, Tobacco Mosaic Virus, the beginning and end of virology. That, of course, involved diseased plants. But in a similar vein, our 2011 article states, in 1898, foot and mouth disease earned a place in history as the first disease of animals shown to be caused by a virus. However, it quickly becomes apparent that, as per the designation, this paper is simply a review article and does not provide direct evidence of any virus. Instead, it states in the introduction that the first step towards understanding the pathogenesis of FMD was Loeffler and Frosch's landmark demonstration that the disease was caused by a filterable agent, i.e. virus. We can pause here to see the parallels with the alleged discovery of tobacco mosaic virus. In both instances, the researchers were unable to observe any consistent microbe in a disease product mixture. They then filtered the material to remove any bacteria, and if the resulting filtrate could still cause adverse effects, then it was said to be due to an imagined, quote, virus. A real scientist would simply conclude that bacteria were not the cause of the disease, but the germ enthusiasts instead claimed that an even smaller microbe must be to blame. We can now examine the alleged pivotal discovery of Loeffler and Frosch in their 4-part Report of the Commission for the Investigation of Foot and Mouth Disease at the Institute for Infectious Diseases, Berlin. As we can gather from the title, the investigation had gone to the Institute for Infectious Diseases, so a microbe was already assumed to be the cause. The first part of the paper outlined the inconsistencies, if not outright failures, to reliably isolate a specific bacterium as the cause of foot and mouth disease. After taking large amounts of blood from sick animals, they conceded. In the great majority of cases, the flasks thus inoculated remained permanently sterile, but in a few of them, micrococci and in some others bacilli developed. They were obviously accidental impurities which had been obtained from the skin of the animals in taking the blood. The paper then mentions that some authors had described, quote, small protoplasmic structures with distinct amoeboid movements as the cause of the disease. However, somewhat ironically, that idea was poo-pooed by the Commission as they considered the appearances non-specific and, quote, even on culture media, specially prepared for the purpose, they could not be cultivated. Sounds a bit like virology, right? With the bacteriological failures and after dismissing the protoplasmic idea, apparently the Commission remained fixated on germs. Thus, their inquiries were, quote, extended in a number of other directions as follows. 1. The transmission of the disease to the various species of animals. 2. The method of infection. 3. The material of infection. 4. The resistance of the virus. We'll stop right there as this is the paper's first mention of the word virus. We know that the word did not have the same meaning to these authors as it would do to a modern virologist, but this is the foundational paper in which the entity was said to be discovered. This pseudoscientific habit of making these hypothesized entities seem real in this manner was born in the 1800s and continues to this day. With regard to what happened in 2020 and Fan Wu's Nature publication, my husband Mark wrote in A Farewell to Virology. In the very next sentence, they announced to the world that this virus strain was designated as WH Human 1 coronavirus. It is where the fraudulent virus, soon to be renamed SARS-CoV-2, was invented out of thin air. Back to the foot and mouth paper, and in the section, Transmission of the Disease to Different Species of Animals, the authors outline the multiple failures to experimentally infect sheep and goats, even though they are supposedly susceptible. In the section Mode of Infection, it is divulged that in order to, quote, infect cattle, the mucous membranes around the mouth had to be scarified first, and then into the damaged tissue went the fluid taken from vesicles of diseased cows. In other words, they went outside natural routes for this allegedly highly contagious condition that the USDA calls a severe, fast-spreading viral disease. If this was correct, then why not perform the experiments by simply bringing a diseased cow into close contact with healthy ones? Spoiler alert, that's not how it works. The next concession from the authors was that amongst their experimental cattle, in the great majority of cases, the disease did not attack the feet and the calves. Well, that does not sound like foot and mouth disease. It is also clear that mucosal and skin vesicles, whether they appear in humans or livestock, are the body's way of eliminating toxic substances. The fluid in the vesicles may be caused by an exogenous factor that is coming from outside the body, or an endogenous factor that is produced within the body. Examples of exogenous factors would be toxins such as arsenic, ivermectin, and poison ivy. Examples of endogenous factors would be anaerobic processes taking place inside the body and the resulting metabolites making their way to the surface. Regardless of whether these eliminatory products have been caused by an endogenous or exogenous factor, they are disease products. Therefore, the extraction and injection of them into another organism is preposterous and fails to test the hypothesis of germ contagion in the natural world. It gets even worse in alleged viral conditions, such as foot and mouth disease, because no germ has ever been shown to exist. The quote virus was simply invented into existence in the 1890s by Loeffler and Frosch, and the claim has been mindlessly parroted ever since.
Unfortunately, this virus can be spread and transferred a lot of ways. So direct contact from infected animal to infected animal is your most common, but it can also spread aerosol, so in the air, and it can also spread, of course, on what we call fomites is our fancy word, but what we mean is dirty trucks, dirty footwear, a service provider going from one farm to the other. Biggest risk, and the one we need to mitigate the most, is the movement of infected animals.
In part 2 of the 1898 article, it is declared that the most certain method of infection is the introduction into the bloodstream of the virus found in the contents of vesicles. Success has also attended the introduction of the virus into the peritoneal cavity, injection into the muscles, and rubbing of it into the mucous membrane of the mouth after wounding by pricking. Once again, they have provided precisely no evidence of a virus, in the modern sense of the word, being present in their disease product mixture. Additionally, the technique of injecting such a mixture directly into other animals is completely distorted from what happens in a natural setting. Somewhat comically, Wikipedia's foot and mouth disease entry states that many early vaccines used dead samples of the FMD virus to inoculate animals, but those early vaccines sometimes caused real outbreaks. Loeffler and Frosch's attempts to immunize animals in the 1890s were such an example. They described injecting 2 types of diluted lymph fluid from a diseased cow into healthy cows, and were apparently surprised at the result. The animals which received the filtrate contracted the disease in the same time as control animals which had received a corresponding quantity of unfiltered lymph. This is the first time that we see the mention of a control in the paper. However, its use is deceptive, as no independent variable was identified, a requirement of the scientific method. It is a theme that applies to the entire field of virology, because no virus has ever been found in nature. As Mark wrote in Virus, Bacteriophage and Single Virus Genomics, from the first purported discovery of a virus, there has been no consistent definition of what a virus is, because, unlike other empirical biological sciences, there has never been a tangible viral particle that could be naturally observed, described, isolated, characterized, and tested for pathogenicity. However, Loeffler and Frosch were on the hunt for a foot and mouth germ and wrote, "It appeared as if the activity of the lymph had not been affected by the filtration. How was this striking fact to be explained?" Well, according to them, 2 alternative explanations offered themselves. Either the germ-free filtered lymph contained in solution some extraordinarily active poison, or the hitherto undiscoverable agent of the disease was so small that it could pass through the pores of a filter, which will certainly keep back the smallest of the known bacteria. They then concluded that the view, therefore, that the effects of the filtrate were due not to any soluble substance in the lymph, but to some agent capable of multiplication, cannot be dismissed as improbable. To be fair to these authors, they did not personally claim that they had characterized the quote agent or virus, but in the world of virology and mainstream medicine, their paper is referred to as the discovery of a foot and mouth virus. For further details involving the history of this period, I recommend Mike Stone's 2023 article, The Virus Concept, where he analyzes the early foot and mouth experiments, including the political and public factors that pushed for a vaccine rather than sound science. With regard to foot and mouth disease, Mike wrote that even though he considered Koch's logic-based criteria as decisive in proving a microorganism as the cause of disease, Loeffler was unable to satisfy Koch's postulates for his, quote, filterable virus. He was unable to culture any microorganism, nor could he visualize one. His experimental infections resulted in contradictory results depending on the species of animals and the route of infection. Reminiscent of Ivanovsky and Bajarink's own methods, no attention was given to the fact that the best results came from unnatural routes of exposure that required wounding the host. Despite the Commission's push for a vaccine in the 1890s, there has been a striking lack of a successful product for more than a century. The excuse, according to Wikipedia, is Like other RNA viruses, the FMD virus continually evolves and mutates. Thus, one of the difficulties in vaccinating against it is the huge variation between and even within serotypes. However, that means there is a lucrative space for organisations who benefit from this narrative.
Brought to you by Pfizer.
And in some parts of the world, FMD vaccines are being rolled out in significant quantities. For example, in December 2025, the South African government announced that they were, quote, waging war against foot and mouth disease, and close to 950,000 animals have already been vaccinated over the last few months with government-procured vaccine stock. There were plenty of buzzwords in their media statement, including science-backed plan, stakeholders, academia, reliable FMD vaccine supply, and sustained funding for veterinary services and research. Yes, the more money and power that goes to the epidemic and pandemic industries, the safer the world will be. It is clearly apparent that this is not a science-backed plan.
Because I represent science.
If we head back to Wikipedia's foot and mouth disease entry, it fraudulently states that the FMD virus can be transmitted in a number of ways, including close contact, animal-to-animal spread, long-distance aerosol spread, and fomites, or inanimate objects, typically fodder and motor vehicles. The clothes and skin of animal handlers, such as farmers, standing water, and uncooked food scraps and feed supplements containing infected animal products can harbour the virus as well. No citation is provided, and in fact, the entire paragraph ends with citation required. That is because the foundational science does not support the disease, quote, transmitting in this way. Furthermore, to this day, no entity fulfilling the definition of a virus has been shown to exist. The scandal is right out in the open when we look at what the World Organization for Animal Health claims about how to diagnose the disease. Their manual of diagnostic tests and vaccines for terrestrial animals states, FMD cannot be differentiated clinically from other vesicular diseases. Laboratory diagnosis of any suspected FMD case is therefore a matter of urgency. If that is true, it makes you wonder how Loeffler and Frosch were apparently diagnosing it so easily in the 1890s. It also highlights the troubled allopathic concept of specific disease entities, rather than organisms simply exhibiting a limited number of eliminatory and healing processes. In any case, the 2025 update in the WOE manual goes on to state that laboratory diagnosis of FMD is conducted by detection of FMD viral antigen or nucleic acid in original samples or in infected cell culture fluids following virus isolation. In other words, the same techniques that were used to create cases during the COVID fraud, that is, lateral flow tests and PCR kits. In the world of virology, we know how this is done. It all starts with a mixture of biological material and the unproven claim that some of the detected genetic sequences in the mixture come from an imagined virus. From that point on, whenever the PCR detects these selected sequences, they call bingo and claim that the non-existent virus is turned up again. In the case of lateral flow tests, it is the same pseudoscience at play, except it involves the detection of proteins that have been inappropriately designated as, quote, viral in origin. It is vital to point out here that we are not disputing that livestock can become unwell, exhibit vesicles on parts of their bodies, and even die dramatically. What we are saying is that there is no need to invoke the virus model. As it stands, Loeffler and Frosch did not demonstrate the existence of a virus in the 1890s, and neither has anyone else since. For those claiming that electron microscopy images such as this one from the FBI Laboratory 2007 report is proof of a foot and mouth virus, please wise up to virology's point and declare scam. For an overview of electron microscopy and its misinterpretation, you can watch my video exposing the topic.
The reason you would distinguish this from, say, foot rot is because it's so contagious. This is not a single animal in the herd. Suddenly it's like, oh, I've got a bunch of lame cattle, or I've got a bunch of drooling cattle, or most likely both.
This notion of contagion has come about due to mistaken conclusions about why animals sometimes get sick in clusters. Like people, healthy animals do not get sick by simply coming into proximity to a sick animal. However, animals in the same area are exposed to common environmental conditions, such as the climate, food and water sources, pharmaceutical exposure, and other forms of man-made poisons and stressors. That is what needs to be investigated when animals are struck down with illness. My family has been involved in the raising of livestock, including cattle, for the past 2 decades, and the animals are never drenched, vaccinated, or given any pharmaceuticals. Likewise, our pet cats and dogs never receive any worm or flea treatments. We are sometimes met with incredulous looks from commercial farmers and vets when we report that our animals are in great condition, and we have never suffered herd losses. It should not be a mystery that this is because we pay attention to the terrain, stick to organics 100% of the time, and never intensively farm. Unfortunately, most people, farmers included, have bought into a model of, quote, pathogens and parasites and engage in the phony war against germs. It's a phony war that suits Big Pharma and Big Ag, who continue to make criminal profits while honest farmers and the wider public are fleeced. It's a phony war that also suits governments and supranational organisations as they award more power and revenue to themselves under the guise of providing, quote, solutions. We can all raise awareness about this monstrous scam because a change in the right direction needs to come from the ground up. For example, my family has become increasingly self-sufficient for meat and more recently in dairy production as well. While this may not be desirable or practical for many people, you can still find and support farmers who are genuinely organic. The benefits that flow are not only to yourself, but to the animals and the environment as well. For more information exposing alleged viral diseases, fraudulent mass slaughters, and what really makes animals sick, please check out all of the resources at drsambailey.com. If you enjoyed this video, please visit supportdrsam.com